Hi everyone, today let's talk about the Asian markets, then we'll get into the calendars, then we'll get into the charts, as well as my results for the day and my thoughts going into tomorrow's session. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So the Asian markets sold off dramatically today. China down 300. And it's at its lowest point since February of 2019. So the Chinese market suffering really dramatically here today. And really the whole region sold off. You even have South Korea, third quarter gross domestic product numbers causing a sell-off. We got Singapore's inflation data up slightly from 4 to 4.1%, still quite high. Australia down 0.82%, Japan 0.83%. And really everything in the Asian markets were down. And overall, that's just a bad omen for the US markets. We don't always follow them directly, but if all of those markets are going down, it's tough for us to be up at the same time. Moving over to the economic calendar, there was nothing for today. For tomorrow, however, we do have global services PMI here at 945 and the 2-year auction at 1300. But the big one for tomorrow is going to be earnings. You can see there was basically nothing on there for today, just a few companies. But for tomorrow, this is the big one. We got Microsoft and Google, Visa, Coca-Cola, Texas Instruments, Verizon, NextEra Energy can be interesting. And then you got General Electric also in the mix. Massive earnings for tomorrow. Most of those are going to be after hours, but we do get Verizon and General Electric in the morning. And then taking a quick look at Wednesday morning, don't forget you got T-Mobile, Thermo Fisher Scientific, as well as Boeing and the CME Group if you hold anything overnight tomorrow. Moving over to Max Payne, you can see there are still a ton more puts. Put call ratio still above 3 here. Total options almost up to 1.3 million. Put wall at 420. Smaller one here at 425. Calls start at 430. Max Payne is also at 430. Does seem like we might drift a little bit more towards that Max Payne area, especially with how few calls we have in the market. Obviously, earnings are going to push us around. That's going to determine market direction, but there are absolutely a ton of puts here. A lot of them are way out of the money, way further than we could possibly get this week, in my opinion. But it does seem like 420 might hold for the end of week on Friday. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&Ps, rallied up in the pre-market after gapping down, could not hold those gains and then fell into the end of the session, ended up bearish on the day, 0.17%, and this could be a potential setup for an island reversal. You do have to entertain that. So we gapped down, held that level, showed a little bit of bullishness on the wick, retested that 200 SMA on the daily chart, broke back down from that level. You can see that here on the hourly chart. But really for tomorrow, you want to be watching that 21 EMA on the hourly chart sitting at 421.09. If that level holds, that could be a good one to trade off of. You really do need it to hold if it's going to turn more bullish tomorrow. Obviously, everything is still very bearish here. We did get a little bit of chop on the shorter term EMAs, but everything on the longer term charts and the longer term EMAs, even on the hourly chart, is still very bearish. Moving over to the NASDAQ, similar thesis, gap down, rally higher, but it did end up slightly bullish on the day, 0.3% to the upside. And you can see here we tested that 353.24 level just like on Wednesday the 27th from last month. We got all the way down to those wicks, touched that level just for a moment, and you can see that here, just barely eclipsing that furthest wick from that previous consolidation, and then we found some support. If we double bottom at this level here tomorrow and it holds, that could be an interesting setup for a potential turn higher. We are at the bottom of this range, but I would be a little bit careful here still. You can see this previous consolidation. We came into the zone. We had like 4 or 5 days of consolidation, and then we got to push higher. So it doesn't mean that it's going to happen all at once. And you can also see here on the MACD, on the daily chart, it does look like we have a couple of more steps to go, potentially looking at that next level at 346.87 to the downside. The longer term structure is still technically bullish because we're above that 200-day moving average, but the shorter time frames are still bearish. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow. Russell continued to make new lows and it was bearish on the day, but you can see the MACD started to roll over to the upside just a little bit. We're still well below my 167.47 level, and we have not gotten all the way down to that 147 level like we talked about. That is the critical one. If it's going to hold, it needs to hold that 164 level, and it is certainly possible. I do want to zoom in here just a little bit. You can see there is just a smidgen of divergence on the RSI. We got lower prices here today, but we did get a slightly higher RSI read. So a little bit of divergence on the Russell. Obviously, that doesn't mean we're going to snap higher immediately, but it is showing a little bit of strength there. Similarly, on the Dow, we have a clear double bottom right now, as long as this level holds at 329.40. Similarly, have a little bit of divergence here on the RSI, and the MACD showing a little bit of strength as well. If we start to see a bit of a move higher, that could be interesting tomorrow. But again, looking at the big earnings announcements after hours. Moving over to the equal weights just for a moment here on the daily chart, I do want to highlight that we had another big bearish day here, 0.63% to the downside, getting very close to this wick low here from 24 March. And then my next level at 134.14. Again, potentially an island setup, gap down, hold. If we gap higher and look for a rally, that could be interesting. But right now, bearish momentum, RSI looks weak, volume stepping up on that candle. Doesn't look great going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. Apple in the pre-market pushed all the way to our level, 170.90. We've been watching that one for a bit now. You can see that previous wick low down to trend. Ended up holding that 170.90 level before that rally up. So at this point, you either have a double bottom or a slightly higher low, depending on how you look at it. Not a bad level to trade off of, but obviously we're still well below all the EMAs and SMAs as well as VWAP, so could just be a short-term pullback. Wouldn't say that it's a trend reversal of any kind, but did show a little bit of strength off of that level. Tesla also showing a little bit of strength. Didn't quite get down to my next level at 197.75, but momentum curling up here. Price holding right at the next level at 214. If this breaks here and holds, gets above VWAP and the 9 EMA on the 4-hour chart, that could be an interesting trade up to the 21, which is currently sitting up around 230. That would give you about $16 of upside. Not a bad little trade on Tesla if we can get that retrace up to the 21 EMA on the 4-hour chart. Moving over to Microsoft and Alphabet, the big ones for earnings tomorrow. Both of these had a really good session. Slight gap down, hit the 200 SMA on the 4-hour chart, held, rallied up to the 21 EMA. Critical level. If that 21 EMA breaks, we could look for a push at least up to trend 336. That would be another couple of percentage points up to the upside possible there. Similar on Alphabet, very close to that 200 SMA, held right to the 21, almost exactly the same in terms of structure. It's worth noting you did have a high, lower high on Alphabet versus Microsoft, which was kind of grinding at that same level before we had a slightly lower low versus this previous one here in October. But that 200 held on both charts, and to me that kind of says we're going to get a little bit of a good earnings pop. Obviously it could go in either direction, but that's what it looks like on the charts to me. Moving over to staples and discretionary. Staples looks like it's setting up a higher low still. Wasn't super strong, still gapped down, still showed strength, fell into the end of the session, kind of sideways right on that 55 EMA. You want to see it get above that level and hold. Technically it's above it by 1 penny. Like to see it get above that highly traded zone as well and then start to rally up. Does look like the initial stages of a rally. 21 EMA also sitting at 67.62. Not breaking down massively like everything else, but not breaking out to the upside quite yet either. Discretionary, big gap down, big rally up, hit VWAP, sold off. Momentum starting to tick a little bit higher here, but I still think it's a little bit early to tell. Moving over to oil and gas and transports. Oil and gas has been selling off here a little bit. Still above the 200 SMA, but momentum is bearish, RSI is bearish. Does not look great. Down pretty substantially on the day. Transports even worse, taking out that trend support. I did add a level here at 221.84. We are just above that. If that breaks, my next level is all the way down at 213.27, and it could move through this area pretty quickly. Transports pointing to more downside to come in tomorrow's session. We're not quite oversold yet, but it could get into that area tomorrow, and this structure is absolutely abysmal. We've been trending down here all the way since the end of July, and there's no end in sight yet. Moving over to breadth, everything's still very bearish here. Both of them had a red candle. Momentum continues to roll to the bear side. 50-day average did okay, but the 200-day average, absolutely abysmal, rocketing down to that next level at 24.25. You can see we took out these previous lows, and now the next level of support for me, all the way down at 24.25, moving through this previous consolidation quite quickly. And that is 4 days in a row stacked to the bear side, closing on the lows. Not even a hint of reversal yet on the 200-day breadth. Moving over to yields, these have been cooling here for just a couple of days, not nearly enough to mean anything. They're still very elevated, much higher than the markets would like them to be. And obviously this is a big driver for markets to continue to the downside as long as yields continue to sit in this range. Moving over to the dollar, we actually got a little bit of a bullish read here for equities. The dollar selling off quite dramatically. 3 very strong hourly candles in a row during the session. This is probably what allowed markets to rally at least a little bit. But now we're holding at this next level, 105.50. You can see that on the daily chart. We're right there. We did get the cross on the 9 and 21 EMAs. After testing the 9 EMA right here, you can see we got into that range and then sold off. Momentum is bearish. RSI bearish. You can see we got very oversold here on the RSI, all the way down into the 17 range off that bigger move. The question is this a high, lower high setup? And we're going to break out below this previous low, all the way down to the 55 EMA, right around 105. That could give equities a little bit of upside tomorrow, but then I would expect that first test to hold, potentially establish a lower high, and then continue to break down. Otherwise, it's going to hold, and we're going to see this rocket higher through that 106 to 108. That could be interesting, and if that does happen, that's obviously going to be very bearish for equities. So critical level here on the dollar going into tomorrow's earnings. Moving over to TLT and JNK. Both of these had a pretty good day today. Yields cooled off slightly. They have been very oversold. But look at this divergence. We got super low RSI reads going back to the beginning of October. Now we have much higher RSI reads, bullish candle, clear divergence. Obviously, still a big down move. Doesn't mean that this is going to reverse yet. We have seen divergence like this before. You can see this low that we had going back to the beginning of August. We had a slightly higher low on RSI with lower prices, and that did materialize in a short-term bounce, but then we ended up going much, much lower. So still be careful. I still think this is a decent opportunity here at TLT. Very good yields. You can see people are definitely taking advantage of this massive, massive volume compared to what we've seen here recently. TLT is typically between that 8 to 10, sometimes up to 20 million in terms of volume. And these candles here recently have been up to 87 million in terms of volume at these lows. So people are definitely taking advantage of these cheaper prices on TLT and locking in those yields. And TLT is probably going to go higher at some point in the future, but this is much more of an investment thesis, not so much a trading thesis. Moving over to the volatility indices, MOVE index selling off a little bit, got very close to that trend, didn't quite get there. VIX got all the way up to 2250, then bounced all the way back down to that 20 level. Still watching for this trend line up around 2450. I think once we get there, we might see a more solid bottom, but we're not there yet. And I still think this is a bullish trend and that we'll still see some higher highs to come, potentially on those earnings announcements either tomorrow or the next day. Moving over to my accounts, a little bit boring on the day. I took one trade, made just $30 on that position. Markets looked pretty bearish to me. And the SPY and the Russell and the Dow were all down. The NASDAQ squeaked out a small gain, but the structure is still very bearish across markets. Probably not going to hold anything into the close tomorrow either with the big earnings announcements after hours. We'll see how those play out. But right now, you could maybe argue a slightly higher low on the Qs, but it's going to depend heavily on earnings, which I think is going to bring some volatility, which is part of why I have no positions going into tomorrow. Let me know down in the comments section what you thought of the Asian markets or the upcoming earnings. And make sure you like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.